My name is Dennis Greene. I was a Boy Scout in Cachalot Council from, uh, I guess my eighth birthday in 1952 through 1959, 1960. I was an Eagle Scout. I was a member of Troop 8, which was associated with um, the synagogue in New Bedford, the name of which is escaping me right now. And I lived outside of New Bedford. I lived in Dartmouth, so I was a little bit out of the mainstream of New Bedford. And I spent 2 years as a camper at Cachalot, and then went to the National Jamboree with the Cachalot Council group. The year after that, I went to Philmont. After that, I became an Eagle Scout, and I worked on the staff of Cachalot for 1959 summer, and stayed in the Boy Scouts through 1959, 1960. So that was my history with the Scouts. I mean, I guess my background goes back a little bit, where I moved to New Bedford when I was 8 years old, and we moved around a couple of times, and I was sort of not connected to anything. And I got into a little trouble as a kid, wandering around the streets, and my dad kind of got me off the streets by bringing me to a place and getting me to caddy. But they tried hard to get me to go to Camp Cachalot when I was 10, and I was too young. But when I was 11, I started at Camp Cachalot, and the idea was my troop didn't send a contingent, so I applied to Camp Cachalot to be a camper for the entire 6 weeks, with one other friend from Troop 8, a boy named David Glicksman. And the two of us were campers at Camp Cachalot for those 2 years. And we would stay, so we stayed there for the whole summer. Each week, Camp Cachalot would turn over. A group of troops would come in and occupy the campsites, and then at the end of the week, they would leave, and another group would come in. And there were probably 6 or 8 of us, I would suspect, that actually spent the whole summer. And we would just get attached to one or another of the troops that were there, and their scout masters would look after us and help us, and we were part of them for a week. So by the end of the summer, whereas a lot of kids had 1 week's experience at Cachalot, the ones that stayed there for the summer, we had 6 weeks there. So we were veterans by then. And I suspect the next year when we went back, we were probably pretty full of ourselves at being experienced campers. So it was a special experience, and it made us feel really a part of the camp. Most of the kids that went to Cachalot were expecting to have a rough and rustic experience, and were fully prepared for it. And they were tougher kids. It was a lower economic slice of society, of which I and they were in. But there was one kid that was there that did the same thing we did. He was one of the 8 that was there for the 2 years full time. And he was from a very much different background. And he sort of really didn't fit in the norm. And it was very tough for him the first years. He was, he tended to be overweight. He tended to be not very athletic. It was rough for him, but he stuck it out for the summer. And I was sort of like proud of him that he could handle it. And I was even more amazed and proud when they went back the next year. And even though he could have, stayed home and gone to yachting classes and the country club or whatever, he came back for the next year and spent the next summer there, and then went to the Jamboree with us. So he like went to rough it and became, quote, more of a man or whatever from the experience. And that impressed me, because I I thought it took a lot of guts. I mean, certainly there was a little log cabiny place. I think it might have been called the 21 Club for, I'm not sure why. That was a refuge for some activities on really rainy days. And the dining hall. And of course, in the first and second year, there was also a Quonset hut, which, you know, had all kinds of machinery and odd this and that. And I think that's where they stored the boats and probably the docks too for the winter. And then there was some kind of structure that was up a little bit away from the waterfront. That what I remember is that's when we had, you know, we went there to get a physical, and that's where I think a nurse might have lived there. Well, I mean, a lot of the memories were sort of worldview changing. I guess one I'd have to talk about. As you know, each week we would get associated with the with a troop that came in, and we'd become sort of part of their troop for the week. And even though New Bedford's a very multicultural city, and it's small enough that we're exposed to loads of different kinds of people, it was also very, I guess, balkanized. In other words, a lot of people were intimately involved with their crowd, very often associated with churches. I mean, most of the people I knew well from New Bedford as a scout were the people from, the place was Tifereth Israel. You know, Troop 8's Tifereth Israel was what I was associated with. And I got to know those kids, which was very good for me because I wouldn't ordinarily have met all those Jewish kids, because I lived in Dartmouth as the only, you know, Jew in my class. But they were pretty much like me. When I spent the summer in Cachalot, we got associated with other troops. One of the troops happened to be from either a Cape Verdean church or one of the Bethel AME churches around Kempton Street. And so it was a all Black or Cape Verdean troop. The leaders were Cape Verdean, and I don't remember who the scoutmaster was, but the assistant scoutmaster was a really wonderful guy who was, you know, he was crippled. He had to use a wheelchair or drag himself around, and you know, had certain deformities, but he was, you know, he was just adored by and protected by the troop, and we were part of that group for that week, which was, you know, I think a little bit strange for them, a little bit strange for us, but it worked out very well, and I think we all grew because of it. And some of those people who I would never have known except for Cachalot. After that, I played a lot of basketball on playgrounds and wandered around New Bedford, and they were now, they were my friends because I had that week's exposure. And that was true of a lot of the other troops. We would meet kids we wouldn't ordinarily have hung around with, and and made some friends. I mean, I guess I've run into Ed since camp. I mean, in the last 20 years, 25 years, and of course he was at Boy Scout functions, and he was in his short pants and Boy Scout uniform, and he might even been carrying a clipboard. He looked exactly the way he did in camp. He was involved in everything. He was aware of pretty much everything that was going on, and he was very comforting. He was very approachable. You could go to him with a problem. You could go to him with a concern, and he encouraged us. It was a big contrast to Stan Kostakis, for instance, who was a scarier guy. He was the one that kept us in line, and it was, we were a bunch of 11, 12, 13-year-old kids who weren't enormously polished or obedient, and you didn't want to cross Stan, and he was a more of an he seemed tougher. He seemed like more of a rugged and maybe formidable character. But I will say that they weren't. They were a presence and they were an influence. But Cachalot, when I was there, really left an awful lot of the running of the camp to the kids who were on the staff. I mean, it was a impressive the responsibility that they were given. Given that I knew kids their age, or my age when I was on the staff, who were senior campers at summer camps. I mean, they were still kids, but from my perspective as a 11, 12, 13-year-old, those kids were grown-ups. I mean, they were very impressive to us, and it was a role. They were role models. They were what you wanted to grow up to be. Dick Santos was he played football. He was a lineman. Compact. I mean, he was, probably 5'8" or 5'9", but he was chiseled like a weightlifter and was evidently a terrific lineman for New Bedford High School. And looked, he was a formidable looking guy. He was I think he was probably he was dark skinned, probably Portuguese, or was Portuguese. And he had this odd side of him where his interest was to be an artist. He studied art after high school, I think at the Swain School of Design in New Bedford. And he was wonderful with kids. I was not a swimmer. I was always terrified of the water and had forced myself to try and swim, but I didn't breathe when I was swimming, so there was only a limited distance I could go before I was floundering. And he was wonderful. He picked me out right away as somebody who needed help, and he encouraged me, telling me I was doing everything right except breathing, which was important. And after a couple of weeks of just getting me to have some confidence and working in the big crib trying to swim that 100 yards, it worked. I got confidence. He made me believe it, and I became a swimmer in that first summer. And he really cared about it. Later on, I'll tell you a funny story. I ran into him in Buttonwood Park when he was going to art school, and he was sitting there sketching, I guess part of an assignment from school. He was sketching a bunch of people that were playing tennis, and he was shading in the arms and the trying to do the human figures, and he couldn't help it. As he shaded them, every one of them ended up being built like him. It looked like a whole bunch of weightlifters playing tennis. And then I lost track of him after that. But a few years ago, David Glixman, my friend, ran into him, and he had after art school somehow became, I guess, recruited and became part of was a CIA agent and spent much of his career in South America, where he spoke the languages. And I suppose if he told me what he did there, he'd have to kill me. And then after that, I think he taught at Quantico. But he was one of the memorable characters I met in New Bedford, and just really a sweet guy. Yeah, I was a pioneering counselor. So there was a an area, I guess, if you were facing the pond, it was to your left down the road a piece. And I had a tent there that I shared with Tom, I think it was Tom Perry, who was the nature counselor who worked in the area right next to where I was. And basically pioneering was teaching kids about use of tools like axes, taking care of knives, making rope, knot tying, building things, building structures with wood and rope. And it got to be a routine for the 6 years I did it. We would teach the kids all the basic skills, and then have a project. Usually we'd either go out and cut logs and build a Texas tower, or after a couple of weeks we started making a suspension bridge, and making the ropes, and then the supports, and then stretching them across the little stream outlet from the what was then the major pond to a little area off the side that was where we fished. It was a lot of lily, it was shallower, and we and cap off the week by having the whole group try and walk across the rope bridge over the pond. So it was, they all had a memorable experience. And what impressed me about just experience and learning is that how bad the first rope bridge was in the third week of camp, to what a slick perfect result we got in the sixth week, because I was learning each week more and more about how to do it. So it was a good feeling of accomplishment, and those kind of things. You got to know the campers, and then of course when it wasn't those activities time, we did the other usual things. We worked on the waterfront when they needed people. We took part in other activities, organized some of the athletic things, and we were pretty much a part of the camp. And I think I remember we were also assigned, each one of us was probably assigned to a table in the dining room, where we basically supervised the meal experience. I also, just as an aside, I'm tone deaf and have no musical ability at all, but I have a really good memory. And I was, for a lot of the time, a song leader, where at campfires at night I would lead the place in singing camp songs. And to anybody who had any musical experience or ear, it must have been horrendous to listen to. But I still remember it. It was I still remember some of the songs that I'd never heard again. So it was if you're on a staff like that, in a camp like that, you get really involved in it. And because of the way Cachalot had campers come in, you had to every week get re-involved with a new group of kids. So in a way, it was really satisfying. Oh yeah. He was probably my best friend on the staff. We knew one another somewhat from New Bedford, because I visited. By then we were 15, so or maybe 16. So I found my way into New Bedford socially, and he was around in the same crowd, and he was an impressive guy even then. He was I think he was an Eagle Scout way before me, and he was a terrific gymnast. And it's funny, when you showed me that picture of him, he looked like just an ordinary athletic 16-year-old. But over the years, my memory of him, he had that tent right on the waterfront, and he used to walk around there on his hands, and he probably had a 23 waist and pectorals that looked like wings, and over the years he got to be, in my memory, something that looked like the Hulk. He was just the most cut guy I've ever seen, and also extremely confident. And so I was surprised to see how ordinary looking he looked in the picture. But he was a tremendous leader. He was a tremendous swimmer, and he ran a real tight waterfront. And we would, the way it worked is when the kids went home for, whenever it was on Friday after camp, Saturday and Sunday, we didn't have any real responsibilities till people started coming in back to camp on Sunday. New group came in on Sunday. So we would often either hitchhike or catch a ride and go back into New Bedford and, spend a little time socializing before we went back to the camp. So, we got pretty friendly. And I also, I went to his house a few times, met his father, who was, also an Eagle Scout, who, as I remember, he exercised that right to continue getting merit badges all his life, and had, 2 or 3 or 4 times as many as we did, which I thought was kind of interesting and odd. But And recently I've talked to Billy. He was, he was I think a captain in the Navy and was probably the chief executive officer on a aircraft carrier. So, he was an extraordinary guy. I remember songs. There was one song that we sang was it actually might have been actually an advertisement for root beer. It was around, and then the prettiest girl I ever saw was sipping cider through a straw. I says to her, "What you doing that for?" "A sipping cider through a straw." And she says to me, "It's nice to be a sipping cider through a straw." So cheek to cheek and jaw to jaw, we both sip cider through a straw. And now I have a mother-in-law from sipping cider through a straw. And now I have a mother-in-law from sipping cider through a straw. The moral of the story is, don't you sip cider, you sip beer. The moral of this story is, don't you sip cider, you sip Dad's old-fashioned root beer. That's it. So now you can see my musical talent.